I mean, the first thing is you got to name the pain, and you've got to name it. And you need to be able to look underneath just the behavior to what might be underneath it, the trauma or the struggle. The secular research on trauma is overwhelming, that early traumas have a way of impacting the way the brain was designed by God, and it'll actually hijack that system that God put in the brain to protect you. The person who says, well, I don't need to deal with that. I don't need to talk about that. I don't want to open those sort of things up. I get that. And I guess I would probably start with one small area of honesty. What I find is often when people come into counseling, their presenting problem is rarely their real problem. Their presenting problem is often just a ruse to say, I want to see how you're going to deal with this, and I'm going to risk talking about something that's easier for me to talk about, because I don't want to really talk about the fact that I'm terrified, or that I don't know if anybody will ever really love me, or I don't know if I'll ever get over my doubts or fear, or I'm haunted by these thoughts. They usually start with something like, I have trouble finishing my work, or I have trouble, and that's fine. That's where we'll start. But I'm always fairly confident that the presenting problem is really just an opening invitation to say, maybe we'll go to something deeper if this process ends up being helpful. Well, first, you've got to live in the truth, and you have to name the pain. You have to be honest about it. You have to give it a name. You have to talk about what happened. Second, you've got to say, I'm healthy enough now to step into this without numbing myself, without escaping. I can face these things. Third, to kind of bring your suffering to the cross. Realize that God does see you and hear you and know what happened to you. I mean, what's the Bible say? That someday you will know as you are known. Well, He knows you. He knows your struggles. He knows the struggles that you've had. And then there's the curious question: what might God be up to? What might God be forming in my life by all this? Personally, we've been dealing with our son's death, and we'll be dealing with that the rest of our lives. But we've kind of gone through we're kind of going through some of that process. We've named how hard it is. We've named how lonely it feels. We've named how quiet our house is, how empty our house feels. Sometimes we go to being numb or busy. I think I've scrolled through my Facebook more in the last 3 months than I have probably 6 months prior. But I'm trying to live in a way where I'm not going to be numb. I don't want to honor my son's life by being numb or by distracting or escape. And then I'm learning to lament and to bring that sorrow to the cross. And then I'm trying to say, what is God? I don't like the way God told this story, but what is God trying to form in me? I don't want this kind of pain to go wasted. I don't want this kind of sorrow to be for nothing. And so what is God trying to form in my life? And I think everybody in our family, my daughter, Mona, and I are all journaling, and my guess is that some of those journals don't look real clean and easy. And sometimes they're just lamenting. Again, it's not whining. It is being honest with God and taking your concerns and doubts and frustrations to Him directly. And in a way, that takes a lot of courage, because you're kind of mad at Him, but you're taking those things to Him. Most of the laments in the Bible come down to God's presence and God's goodness. And deep down, those are our questions. Is God good? And where are you? And that's what you'll find most of the laments in the Bible being. Sometimes it's helpful to keep writing your lament until you kind of get to those deeper questions. I've asked people a lot of times in counseling to write a psalm of lament about a particular thing, a specific, maybe just as one small area they can face. The lament of my angry teacher, or the lament of my, just pick one area, and could you write, because the Psalms are written in specific areas. I mean, when David sinned with Bathsheba, he writes a psalm. The Psalms are honest reflections to God. Often, what you find in the Bible is, and this is true for the laments, and a third of the Psalms are laments. All but one end with praise, because often when you're honest about your struggles with God, you'll at least have some gratitude that He will listen to your complaint, and some sense that I'm not alone in that. If you want to look at the book of Lamentations, if you want to talk about laments, the thoroughness of the lament, the first, second, fourth, and fifth chapter of Lamentations, there's nothing positive in it. As a matter of fact, it follows the Hebrew alphabet. Our version of that would be A is for how awful this feels. B is for how betrayed I feel. C is for, it literally is a poem that goes through the Hebrew alphabet with lament. And then there's an interesting line where it says, this should have killed me, or this should have destroyed me. Great is thy faithfulness, your mercies are new every morning. And you'd think, well, that's a good Christian song would be, that's where this would end. No. God knows our sorrows, and the book of Lamentations then goes back into more sorrow. And that's true for us in our lives, that we have moments, but then we go back into the sorrow. Until we get to glory, there will be something wrong with everything. We live in a fallen world. Okay, we can't name everything. We can't face everything. Is there one thing you could face? Maybe even just face your emotion. What are you feeling today, right now? Could you write a prayer? Could you write a lament? Start with what happened. Then write about how it felt, and then write about what it cost them, and then write about what their great fear is now. And that will walk you through pretty honestly whatever it is you're avoiding. Ask God to meet you in that suffering. I met this past year with missionaries from Ukraine. What am I going to tell them? They're in the middle of a war with Russia, and they've got friends that are POWs, and their houses have been destroyed, and I was supposed to help them. My goodness. And so I just thought, what do they need? I think they need to be able to take this confusion and struggle that they're having and take it directly to God and lament. And so some of them, when they got to the end of that, of kind of naming it, and kind of what it cost them, and what they got to the end of that, had some gratitude. One ended his with just, how long, Lord, how long? One of them ended it with, you tell me to love my enemies, but I hate the Russians. How can I love my enemies? One of them ended with thanks that God heard them. But it kind of begins by just going through a real simple process of, it's not simple, it's not easy, but of kind of talking about what happened. How did that make them feel? What did it cost them? And what is their great fear now? We have to start being honest in the church. We have to quit 700 clubbing everything. And what do I mean by that? The 700 Club means well. It's the Christian Broadcasting Network, and every one of their testimonies tend to be testimonies of grand deliverance, where somebody was struggling, they met Jesus, and now everything is easy. And that is not what the Bible teaches. What the Bible teaches is you're alone, you're dead, your life has no meaning or purpose. You meet Jesus and He gives you meaning and purpose, and struggles still stay, and difficult times are inevitable. A pagan gets cancer and a Christian gets cancer at the same time, so the world can see the difference. There's supposed to be something different about people who are walking with their suffering with Christ and people who aren't. So pastors have to start being honest about what it means to live in a fallen world, and that God can deliver, and sometimes He does do deliverance. Sometimes He takes away all struggles and pain, and But sometimes God, and I would even say probably often, God instead allows the pain to form a person and to change a person and to grow a person and to create courage and character and perseverance. On this side of heaven, there are some things that will not be resolved. On this side of heaven, there are some things that won't get all the way better. And there are things on this side of heaven that will cause you to question God's goodness sometimes. There's things on this side of heaven that will make you wonder, where is God in the middle of this? And we just have to start being honest about that. You know, most evangelical Christians would disagree with a Joel Osteen who says, you know, because you know Jesus, you're going to have a Cadillac and God's going to give you. But we have our own Presbyterian version of that, which is basically, if I follow the rules, God owes me, and I'm not going to suffer much, and I'm not going to struggle much, and life will be easy, and I won't struggle with immoral thoughts, or I won't struggle with wrong desires. If I become a Christian, then all those things go away. And I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. I think what the Bible teaches is those things become less important, and the primary thing of my relationship with Christ and who He is becomes more important than the struggles that have defined me in the past. And that's a better message. I mean, it seems like sometimes we want to sell a product that says, if you come to know Jesus, you won't have pain. I don't think that's what the cross teaches. I think what the cross teaches is that if you know Jesus, it's possible to choose love even in the midst of pain. And that is a greater lesson than there is no pain. The Bible makes a promise that life will be meaningful, that your suffering will not go unnoticed by God, and that God can use even the most difficult things for His good and for His glory, and you will not be alone in your pain. That's the gospel. That's what it promises. Now, we sell a much cheaper product often in evangelical Christianity, kind of a God owes you an easier life. And I don't think that's what He's promised. You know, there are lots of reasons that people struggle. I mean, there are people with schizophrenia, which is a brain problem. My son's autism was something that was not a spiritual issue that he needed to deal with. It was a brain issue that he dealt with. So I don't want to oversimplify everything, but I think it is helpful to at least have a template that would suggest, barring the medical aspect of or the brain aspect of mental illness, the refusal to live in the truth is going to be a key factor, and I would suggest the primary factor in most of our mental illness and addictions. What ultimately is an addiction? An addiction is a relationship with a thing, an activity, a person, a behavior that temporarily numbs the pain of living in a fallen world. And at first, it works. At first, it gives you dopamine, and you're happy and you're doing well. And then it turns on you, and when it turns on you, it takes that reward system of the brain and hijacks that, and now you find yourself kind of lost in that. If from the very beginning there'd been a commitment to, this is difficult, but I can face this. Instead of, this is difficult, I need to numb this, or I need to distract myself from it. Most of the things of the world are very distracting. They can't distract you from the truth. They can't distract you from reality. Reality will bubble itself back into our world. And God is big enough, I'm betting my life on this, that God is big enough to deal with whatever struggles you have in your life honestly, and that He doesn't need to become something that lets me minimize or numb my pain, but something that lets me face my pain. Like I said, that's a better gospel message. I mean, that's the message Paul gives when he says, if you were a slave when you became a Christian, you can still live for Christ. That sounds crazy to us in America because that means his circumstances didn't change. But God doesn't promise circumstantial change. He promises heart change. And that's not done by pretending, that's done by facing. I think we can expect God to meet us in the most difficult places of our lives. God does a better job with our brokenness than he does with our pride or our successes. I mean, I appreciate Tim Tebow being a Christian. I think it's great, but we want to put celebrities and rock stars and pro athletes and somehow we want to say, now they're Christians, so don't you want to be a Christian? And the subtle message is, and then you'll be a rock star, an athlete, and you'll have the same kind of success that they have. And I've known Jesus for a long time now, and I'm still not a good athlete, and I'm still not famous, and I'm still not rich, and but I'm not alone. And the things in my life that I would say are the hardest, I found God has met me in. Looking back on my life, what I would have said is the hardest thing in my life, now as I look back, I would say was one of the most important blessings and most important things in my life. And so I think what God promises is not that I'll be famous or important. What he promises me is that he will never leave me, that he will meet me in suffering and sorrow because he is a God who knows sorrow and struggle, and that there ultimately will be meaning and purpose in the things that I don't understand.